We are grateful to have with us some visitors from the Midwest. Always glad to have visitors from the Midwest with us from Faith Baptist Bible. Is it still college or is it? Yeah, it still is. Some are changing the name of universities and other things, but not yet. But we've appreciated, or I've appreciated Faith Baptist Bible College for many, many years. When I grew up in Michigan, my pastor was on the board of trustees of the college. It was a great disappointment to him that I did not attend Faith Baptist Bible College, but it was not a disappointment to Faith Baptist Bible College in that sense. But I had many friends who did attend and have been pastoring now for many years faithfully. When I went out to attend seminary in the Northwest, there were many of my classmates had gone to Faith, even though they had a seminary of their own. Some of my classmates and very close friends over those years. I mentioned to you when I was out in Arizona last spring, I got a chance to spend a night with a guy I grew up with who is now in the ministry there. We hadn't seen each other in 40 years. He was an illustrious, or is an illustrious Faith Baptist, he and his wife are illustrious Faith Baptist Bible College graduates. And a pastor from my hometown who was the president for a time, Dr. Shipp. Back in the 80s, he was the president, and then Dr. Shipwell. So a lot of connections there, and I still have them. President Dr. Tillotson is a really good guy, and appreciate him. He spoke at a conference I attended in Pennsylvania a few years ago, and when it was over, he and a couple of other couples, my wife and I, and at least one or two other couples, we all went to Chick-fil-A for milkshakes after one of the evening services. I got to know him on a little bit more of a personal level, and what a wonderful guy. And then there are some close friends now who are teaching there that I've known for years, pastoral colleagues, and just grateful for them, the Brown family, Dan and his brother Doug. Doug is, I think, one of the deans, and Dan is teaching at the seminary level. So just a lot of connections that I have there, and they're in town, and he's going to share a little bit more about what's happening at the college, obviously, and give an introduction. But they're in town. They were at the teachers' convention up in New Hampshire, and then they're going to be doing something for me tomorrow that I'm very grateful for. They're doing chapel for me. I do elementary chapel. It's preschool through second grade for the first one, and third through sixth grade and the second one. It's the hardest thing I do all week. It really is. I find it much easier to prepare a sermon for this group than I do to try to figure out how am I going to minister to preschool. I wasn't trained to deal with preschoolers. So I do the best I can, and I'm grateful for the opportunities, but I'm also grateful when people take that burden off me and allow me to enjoy their time. So they'll be here with us tomorrow as well, and they're traveling around. So John and Morgan Crossman, so I'm going to ask them if they'd like to come and give a presentation at this time at the school. Kind of step up however you'd like to. Step up, step down.
So we are from Iowa, that's where we live now, but we're actually from colder states, so this is perfect weather for us. Morgan's from Minnesota, I'm from the East Coast, well, I can't say that, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from New Brunswick, if you guys know where that is. It's right above Maine, or over from Maine. So this is actually the ideal weather for us to be visiting. We are from the college, so we'll be speaking around chapel, some of the kids, and just enjoying that opportunity. We travel a lot around the Midwest, but like the pastor said, we're here for the convention. So that was fun to be there and meet all the teachers, administrators, and just see what God's been doing on this side of the continent and see everything. We're so stuck over the Midwest and seeing all the cornfields and everything. But it's good to be over here, see some life over here. So God's been blessing Faith. We're up 37% this year. So that's a pretty big number. A lot of new freshmen, so a lot of fresh faces are there this year. Quite a few actually from this side of the world. A couple kids from Massachusetts and a few from here. So that's good to see as well. So I'll let you kind of talk. We have something called faith testimony. So your faith testimony, how you got the faith, just how God works in your life there. So Morgan will talk a little bit about that.
college was my senior year of high school. So she was just finishing up everything as I was just starting the whole college process. And so she would always come home on breaks and tell me, I love Faith, you should go look at the education program, or, look at sports, or talk to the coaches, that kind of stuff. So I heard a lot about Faith through her, and so she kind of helped me get ready for college that way. And so ever since I've been there, these last 4 years have been really growing, both just academically, obviously, because it's school, but also just spiritually in my life. And then just spiritually us together as a couple as well. But the biggest highlight for me through all 4 years was just the amount of people that would continue to pour into me because they actually truly cared about me as a person and not just as another person in a class or another number in chapel or something like that. But they truly cared about my spiritual walk with the Lord more than they cared about how I was doing on my next science test or my next history exam or whatever. And there was a lady in the student life department that I met with every other week, and we just got to sit down and talk about life. And she got to help me learn what it means to be a godly woman in college, how you get serving in your local church, but also as when we got engaged and as we started preparing for our wedding, and I started thinking about, okay, what does a godly wife look like? She was able to help point me to scripture, and she was able to help me. This is what a godly wife looks like. She comes alongside her husband, she encourages her husband. And just the amount of times that I had ladies in the education department, but also outside that department, pour into my life, really show that they cared about me spiritually more than just the academic side of things. So I was really thankful for my time at Faith. I really appreciated all the people that poured into me and that truly cared about me, and then poured into us as a couple too as we were preparing for our own wedding and our life together. So we're both really thankful for what God did in our lives through Faith, and we're really excited to see where He leads us next.
So, yeah, thanks for having us here. If you have any questions about Faith or anything, we'll be here all day tomorrow as well. And if you kids want stickers, we have stickers too. Or adults. So, thank you.
More regarding those things, let's look together Psalm 27. Verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war shall rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired, the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me, and he shall set me up upon a rock. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praise unto the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy also upon me and answer me. When thou saidest, seek ye my face. My heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me. Put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of my enemies. I've entitled this morning's message, The Seeking Heart. It goes along with the series that we've been looking at here through the Psalms, Pursuing the Heart of God. David was called a man after God's own heart. What does that look like? What characteristics ought we to have in order to be characterized by the same thing as a people after God's own heart? This psalm really brings it forward. Now, I preached on this psalm, and some of you may recall that back in January of this same year. I preached, but I focused more on verses 13 and 14, and I'm not going to look at those today. I'm going to be focusing in on verse 4, verse 8, and verse 8, and then verse 11. Those are the primary verses that I'm going to be looking at today. So as you follow along with the outline of the message, you'll be able to see each of those things. For David is asking of the Lord to help him enter into a more perfect relationship with God. And is that not what we all desire? To have a more complete a more fulfilling relationship with the God of all creation. David expresses that desire and that need in this passage. And I think it speaks to that which we ought to yearn for as well. He'll say, how do we get to be this way? You see, to be something or to strive for something is something we can understand and say, well, yes, we need to be that. We need to get to that place. But how do we get there? And David demonstrates for us here that it starts with a yearning. Jesus also speaks to this in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who seek after righteousness. Okay, or literally the word says hunger and thirst after righteousness. For what? They shall be filled. Hungering and thirsting after God is the first condition. David shows us here what that looks like. We will never enter into a more complete relationship with the God of eternity, the God of creation, until we first hunger for it. And that is true in every aspect of our life, is it not? I mentioned we do have the representatives from the college here today. In the colleges, there is the pursuit of knowledge. As one goes through the 4-year program of a college education, I think of the theological training that they give at Faith Baptist Bible College. In fact, one man that I know who taught at a Christian college in the theology department, not at Faith and not at where I went to Cedarville, but at another one, once said that there is nothing more dangerous than a college theology sophomore. They are the most dangerous theologians on earth. They think they know everything and they know nothing. But that passes. There is that phase that they pass, and then the junior year and the senior year, and then you are bombarded. It's like drinking out of a fire hose as you're getting all of that coming at you, and you develop. And there are always going to be, in any of those settings, there are those who treat education as a necessary evil, in the sense, not necessarily as an evil as we think of evil, but as a necessary condition to get where you want, and you just kind of endure the college experience. That was me. Education was something I felt was necessary. I sacrificed quite a bit in order to get the education. But the idea of spending time, a lot of time in a classroom, did not excite me or thrill me. I did what I needed to do. I accomplished what I needed to accomplish. I did well in some courses and not quite as well in other courses. And there were courses that I enjoyed more than others, but it was something more of an endurance test to see if I can get through this. But I knew other students. They loved it. I mean, they just, education was to get more and to understand more and they would, you know, I mean, just to illustrate the difference. There would be textbooks I would have to read in order to be able to accomplish. I got to get through the textbook. There were other books I had to read in order to be able to write papers and do other things. But I didn't do a lot of extra reading outside of what I had to read in those days. Now I do a lot more today because I need to in order to beat this lock. But in those days I read what I had to do and I did what I had to do. These guys would check out books from the library just to read for fun on the weekends. I didn't understand those guys. I had no affinity with them. There were other things that I had in mind. But they accomplished a great deal. And many of them are now training others. And I'm grateful for them. The Lord gave them. And the point I'm trying to make, I'm not criticizing them, nor am I denigrating myself. I'm saying we had different approaches. We had different desires, different pathways that we go down. And God gave us each our own personalities and our own hungerings and our own thirstings and the things that we wanted to do. I loved doing things with teenagers. For those years as a youth pastor, they said at the seminary I went to, because the Lord blessed my youth ministry out in Washington greatly. There were about 40 or 50 kids in in the youth group when I got there. And in my last activity before I came here, we had 457 teenagers at the event. And the Lord just blessed it. And they were going to name an award after it. They were going to call it the Golden Propeller Beanie. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's kind of the goofball that has the little hat and has the little propeller on the top. Because all my classmates said, "You're nuts. You're a complete nut." When I came here, my wife said, "Now, you are no longer a youth pastor. You need to stop acting like one." And so there were things I actually had to grow up a little bit in order to be the pastor. But in that sense, I had a different approach to life. And they had their pathway. But the one thing that characterized us both was a yearning to be the best at what God had called us to be, what God had called us to do. Without that yearning, without that hunger, you don't strive. The same thing is true of an athlete. He does not succeed unless he is willing to make incredible sacrifices, physically, to do that. Many of you know I love college football. These college football players are children to me. Okay, they are still 19 and 20. Even my own kids are not old compared to the college students that are there. But I look at these guys. What is the word used? They're ripped. Okay, they got muscles on their muscles. So I call them children, but I wouldn't want to tangle with any of them. They have made incredible sacrifices to achieve their athletic talents at a very high level. How do we get to that place in our spiritual lives? We have to have that same yearning, that same willingness to sacrifice, that same vision before our eyes that is willing to let go everything else in order to get where we need to be in the spiritual sense. My father once said to me, wisely, I think it was about the time I was going to college, he said to me, he said, "You will always get what you seek. It's not hard. You want to be a millionaire, and if you're willing to sacrifice everything else to get there, you'll get there." He said the key isn't getting what you seek. The key to success in life is seeking the right things. That was good counsel. My father wasn't a pastor, but that was good counsel. Learn to seek the right things. This is what David points out to us here. So all that is by introduction. Let's look what David has to say here in verse 4. He says, "One thing I have desired of the Lord that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all my days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple." He talks about the place that he wants to dwell. This is the place, and when he talks about dwelling, he's not using the word dwelling in the sense of being there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for all of his life. Obviously, he had other responsibilities that he had to accomplish. But when he talks about dwelling, he said, "This is where my heart is." You've heard the cliche, home is where the heart is. But you know that feeling when you're out working all day long and you think, "I just want to get home. I want to get home to my wife, my kids, or to my wife, or even just where there's some peace and quiet. And I just want to get through this day." We've all had that feeling, have we not? Where we just want to be where I'm at peace. Where I don't have to put up any kind of facade for anyone. I don't have to be anything for anyone in the sense other than what I really am. I can just be myself. You know what that's like. You know how you dress around your house? You would never go out dressed like that, necessarily. The clothing, or say, no, I would not. I wouldn't want anyone to see. If anybody is, comes knocking at the door, quickly we run and get other clothes on necessarily, or do other things. But when it's just us, we just want to be comfortable. We want to be at peace. It's where we dwell. And here the passage is saying, David is saying, I just want to dwell with the Lord. This is where I'm at peace. This is where my heart is quiet. This is where I am at rest. This is where I don't have to be king anymore. I can just be David. I don't know about those who are in high positions of great authority. I can't imagine those who carry the burdens, such as the President of the United States, the burdens that they carry every day through the course of their lives. Now, they obviously wish to have that because they go and they make great sacrifices to obtain that office, more than I think I can make to obtain such an office. But they make those sacrifices, they make those compromises, they do the things that they need to do to watch how a man ages from the time he enters office to the time he leaves is something to behold. Why? The stress of that. And it's always with you. But they speak of the places that they go many times. For President Reagan, it was his ranch in California. For President Bush, it was the ranch in Texas. For our current president, it's his beach house on Rehoboth Beach. It's wherever that place that you go. For the previous president, it was Mar-a-Lago. There was that place where they could go where you could be you, as opposed to having all of the pressures on you all of the time. That's understandable. David's saying that's what it's like. He's king of a nation. To just be able to go and dwell in the place of the Lord. And this is what he says. I will dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. To what? To behold the beauty of the Lord. To behold the beauty of the Lord. What is he saying here? He's not saying that he can see God physically with his eyes. What he is beholding is in his heart and his mind, his entire reflection, his entire mind, his entire heart is centered on who God is. When was the last time that you went to prayer and you spent much time not thinking of the requests that you're going to ask of the Lord, although there's certainly nothing wrong with that. The Lord tells us he wants your requests. He takes delight in us coming and asking him. And he says, Jesus says in the Gospels, he said that when you come to your Father, he delights in answering your prayers. He said, as a father, how many of you, if your son were to ask for a fish, that you'd give him a stone? Okay? You would not. Or bread, and you'd give him a stone, or fish, and you'd give him a serpent. I mean, how many would do that? He said, your Father who's in heaven, is he not better than you are? Of course he will. He delights in meeting our requests. But when you read the things that David wrote, when he reflected on God, it wasn't, there were requests, okay? Save me from my enemies was a common request. Prosper me in your way. These are requests. And even in this passage, there are requests that he makes. But many of his psalms, they reflect on who God is. How many of you, when you pray, do you extol the virtues and the glories of God's goodness? Or we reflect on God's omnipotence, his power, his majesty, his omniscience. How many of you, and how many of us, I should say, how many times do we just embrace and completely surround ourselves in all of God's perfections? It is not enough just to understand God's perfections theologically. When I was doing my training at the seminary in Washington, one of the things that we had to do at the conclusion of our time, we had to go through what was called orals. What orals were, it was a rather unpleasant experience. But what orals were was a doctrinal statement that you had to develop. Mine was, I think, 37 or 38 pages of your theology, what you believe. And you would present that. It would be given, it would have to be turned in about February. If you're going to graduate in May, it would turn in about February. And about April, you would have your appointment. You would go forth in front of 4 or 5 faculty members, and they would spend the next 3 hours making your life miserable. They would pour into every detail. These are theology professors. They would pour into every crevice of your doctrinal statement and then make you defend it. One of my professors, and of course, you know this personality, I'm not really good with authority. I've always been kind of a renegade to a certain extent. My son puts it this way, I don't play well with others always. And there's an element of truth to that, and that's always kind of been the case. So I was in seminary, and I was going through these orals, and one of the professors, he said, where did you come up with this? I didn't teach you that. I said, yeah, you didn't, and you were wrong. The professor stepped back like that, his eyes got big as dollars, and he went, that statement took some guts. And, you know, the point, and then he hammered me, and I pushed back the best that I could, and we parted well. But nonetheless, I learned a doctrinal statement. But you know the thing I've learned more since those days? That God cannot be reduced to a doctrinal statement. And that may seem like an incredible hard concept, but it's not, really. Okay, God doesn't exist on paper. Now, wouldn't it be nice in some ways if he did? But in most ways it wouldn't be nice, because a God on paper has no power. He's merely the stuff of legends. When God is a God that's only on paper in a doctrinal statement, there is no interaction with a doctrinal statement. I may engross myself in a doctrinal statement. I could read theology book after theology book after theology book. But it's not enough. When I was in high school, I enjoyed the game of football I played in high school, as you well know. I could have read every book there was about football. But reading a book about football does not make you a football player. There are students here at school, and I enjoy listening to them because they are like what I was at their age, junior high school. I knew every statistic there was to know. I knew what teams were playing who on Saturday and on Sunday. I knew who was the best quarterbacks and who were the best running backs, and I knew all of those things, and I could argue all the statistics. And then I thought I knew everything there was to know about football. Then I suited up. And I thought I knew and understood that game well. And you do until you get smashed in the mouth the first time. So the first guy who is bigger than you goes head to head and literally tramples you. And I remember my freshman year in high school. We were playing a scrimmage, just a scrimmage, not a game, because I didn't get to play in the real games. I wasn't good enough to play in the real games. But we were playing a scrimmage against the team that won the state championship. 5 guys off of that team all played in the NFL later on. 5 guys. One of them was a man by the name of Booker Moore. He played at Penn State and went on to play for the Buffalo Bills. Tragically died of brain cancer when he was still a very young man. But my coach put me out against him. I was a freshman. I weighed about 107 pounds dripping wet. I still have scars from Booker Moore when he stepped on my chest on his way to the end zone. An oil slick is what I was after he hit me. I realized then that I was never playing in the NFL. I realized then that I was never going to be an all-state football player. But I understood what it was going to take. I saw what a real player looked like, and it hurt. You know, in the spiritual realm, and I use that as an example, in the spiritual realm, many of us, we just read about God, but we don't know Him. It's like the pipsqueak who knows all of the stats. 107 pounds dripping wet, but can't do the job. can't play the game. Not through any fault of his own, not through lack of desire, but just genetically, God just didn't give it to him. Aren't you glad that spiritually it's not about genetics? That God gives us all the opportunity to enter into that relationship with him. But we must desire it. We must hunger and thirst after it. We must desire to be with him. We must desire his presence. And that's really what this verse is saying. Now my time is slipping by. Probably already has. Verse 8. When thou saidest, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me. Put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. He says his face. He's saying, I want to see your face. I want to experience not just your presence, but I want to see your face. You think of a young couple. When my wife and I were engaged, I was in Connecticut, she was in Ohio. The entire year before we married, we saw each other for a few days here and there. For a year. But I don't know what the phone system was, but they loved us. I think I kept several telephone employees employed. Because every night we would talk on the phone. Maybe 2-3 hours? Pretty close. Every night. Every night. And that was in the days when the phone was still hooked up to a cord. I know for some of you who are younger, I can remember those days. But the phone was still hooked up to a cord, and long distance was still a thing. Okay? And it was expensive. I remember, getting my first long distance phone bill during that first month that I was in Connecticut. Over $300. You got to understand, I was only making $200 a week. And I had to pay my rent, and I had to eat, and I had to pay my car insurance. It was like, but the next week it was $400. Or the next month. No regrets. To this day, no regrets. But as enjoyable and as needful as those conversations were, they were nothing compared to seeing the face and being with her, being in her presence. So many of us, we speak with God, but we really do not desire to truly be in his presence in that way. But when we have something, when we get someone's face, that's really another way of saying we want that person's attention. The scriptures talk about what gets God's attention. And the scriptures say, it says, a humble and a contrite spirit gets God's attention. God turns his face on a humble and contrite spirit. That humble and contrite spirit, that's what David is saying. I just want to have you, I just want to see your face. I just want to see your person. I want to not just experience your person, but I want to experience your favor. I want to experience your pleasure in my life. I want you to be pleased with me. David, as he expresses this, he says, don't hide your face from me. Don't go away from me. I want to see you. Now, how do we see God? It is not in a physical sense, because no man can look upon God and live. When he sees God, he's saying, I want to see you everywhere. In everything that you do. Every thought that comes in my mind, I want to recognize you as its source. Every single thing that I do, I want it to be inspired by the things that your word tells me and teaches me. I want your face to be upon me, and that I want to experience your blessings that only come as I reflect your face to the world around me. This, he says, he will seek. This is what his heart's desire was to seek the face of God, to seek the presence of God, and to seek the pleasure of God. Now, the last thing that I want to see here before my time is gone, verse 11. He says, teach me thy way, O Lord. You see, all of these things reflect something that he is seeking. He's seeking God's presence. He seeks God's pleasure in his life. But he also seeks God's will, God's purpose. He says, Lord, direct my paths. I don't know what to do. We all come to times of life like that when we're up against it. Or there's a challenge that we are facing and we have no idea what we are to do. And it's at that particular juncture of our lives that it seems as though prayer is only words spoken into the air. And there is despair that comes into our lives because we don't know where to turn. And we go to God in prayer, but that there's just something that is lacking in that sense. That is what David is expressing. He's saying, Lord, in those times, teach me. In that sense, in those times when I don't sense your presence, when I don't feel as though you are pleased with me necessarily, don't hide your face from me in anger, but teach me what thy way is. Do we desire that? Many times people turn away from Christ because they are afraid of what a life in Christianity may mean for them. And there are times when many a Christian fails to commit themselves unto the Lord because deep down they're afraid of what that might mean. Years ago when I was a youth pastor in Washington, a parent came to me in tears and ashamed, and said, I came to talk to you rather than the senior pastor because this is about my son. She said, I know that I need to be completely surrendered to the Lord and I need to give my child over to the Lord, but I have sensed that if I do that, my son will go away and I will not see him, but only sporadically. And I said, that's certainly possible, but what gave you that idea? She says, because I see so many of you who are in ministry and you're nowhere near your families. And I said, yeah, that's true. I said, because Jesus said we must forsake family sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And go wherever the Lord leads us. And she said, and I can't do that. So I prayed with her, and then I did talk to the senior pastor and shared with him where she was struggling. And she eventually came through it because her son, I know her son, he's in administration at a Christian college on the West Coast. And he is hours away from his parents, and they sent him away to college, but I'm sure it was very difficult for them. But there are others who don't want to surrender their lives to the Lord because, hey, I've got money to make. I've got other things I want to do. I've got plans for my life. And those things I've got to fulfill before, and if I surrender myself to the Lord, He may send me someplace else. There are others says, I don't want anything to do with that Christianity thing because if I go that route, then I've got to give up this, and I've got to give up this, and I've got to give up this, and I've got to give up this. It is so hard to explain to people who don't understand that you may end up giving up those things, but it's not hard to do. It's not something that really impacts you at all. Things are nothing. You don't worry about giving up the dreams you once had because God places in you another desire. What is going here or going there or having this or having that? What does that matter when your whole heart is centered on pleasing the Lord and going wherever He wants you to go? That's what a seeking heart does. Go anywhere. To a young person who is wanting to have a spouse, but does not, how does one explain, maybe this is not what God has for you? He has something far better for you than that. And they'll say, what could be better than that? They say, well, it's easy for you to say, Pastor, you've had a wife for almost 39 years. So it's easier for you to say that. But for others, and they're saying, in my life, it's hard. But when we're seeking God, all these other things matter not. To the widower or to the widow, what do we say? Follow God. To the single, what do we say? Follow God. To the married, what do we say? Follow God. To the one who is called to ministry, we say, follow God. To the one who is not called to ministry, we say, what? Kind of fell into the pattern here? Okay. Follow God. Teach me thy way, O Lord. Tell me your purpose. Show me your purpose. Now, does God lay it all out immediately? No. His purpose isn't laid out in a book. Now, certainly he gives commands and he gives principles of Scripture. We follow that. But the specific pathways that he has to go, he reveals to us this oftentimes one step at a time. We walk by faith, not by sight. We take the steps that we need to take in order for God to work his will. Teach me thy way, step by step. And so in my own life, that step has taken to being a college student traveling and filling pulpits on the weekends, doing youth rallies on Saturday nights at different times in different places. To an assistant pastorate in Connecticut, then to an assistant pastorate in Washington State, under two very different personalities, both gifted in their own ways, but very diametrically opposed to each other in style. Learning from both good and bad. And then coming here and having to take it step by step. I can tell you from my own experience, God does not tell us up front everything that we're going to experience. It would weaken us, not strengthen us. How are we strengthened? By taking one step at a time and seeing God's faithfulness. Teach me thy way. So let me bring it all together here. What does the seeking heart do? It seeks the presence of God. It is satisfied with nothing less. It seeks the pleasure of God. In other words, seeks God to be pleased with him, and nothing else will suffice. That is the highest goal and highest aspiration of the seeking heart. And then the seeking heart seeks God's purpose. Always looking for where God would have you go, what God would have you do. And once again, not being willing to settle for anything less than God's exact purpose for our life. Whatever that may be. David had a seeking heart. And because he had a seeking heart, he was called a man after God's own heart. If that is going to characterize us, we must seek what he sought. We must seek the presence of God. We must seek to have God's pleasure, for him to be pleased with us, and we must seek his way for us, his plan and purpose. Is that the case for your heart? Are these the things it seeks? This is the question of the morning. Only you can answer it. Let us pray. Father in heaven, thank you for your word, for its teaching, its instruction. The lessons that are here for us are great and many. Lord, our failures are great and many. There is sin that often besets us. The weights of this world often hinder us in our pursuit. But Lord, I pray that we would pursue you, that we would seek after you with our whole heart. For your word promises us that when we seek, we'll find. Lord, help us to seek you. Help us to find you in every place. Lord, teach us what it means to dwell in your presence. Help us to seek and desire it. Lord, Lord, teach us your way, your plan and purpose for each and every one of us. And although our pathways may be different, Father, I just would pray that we would learn to trust you and to walk by faith. Father, all of these things are things that we need to desire, but often do not. Forgive us where we fall short. Lord, plant in us a desire to seek after you with our whole heart. We ask these things in